worldwide, welcome to the Bruce channel. I'm Bruce and there's a lot going on. Turns out there was a big Atlantic hurricane, Earl, and it caused widespread damage and dozens dead. And it was even over and done and gone before I ever heard about it. And I suppose that's because it didn't threaten us here, but instead Mexico got hit pretty hard. But those of us in the East do need to really start paying attention in as much as the Atlantic season peaks in mid-September. Some of the most memorable hurricanes, they're approaching their anniversaries. Hurricane Camille, one of the deadliest, hit in 1969. Mississippi and Alabama, the coastlines were wiped out. Andrew wiped out Homestead, Florida. That was April 24th in 92. I remember being on the air that morning trying to see how bad it was going to be. Some memorable Carolina hurricanes, Hugo and Floyd, were both September storms. And of course, it's not only the Gulf states or the southern states, relatively late in the season, sure, October, but 4 years ago, Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast. Anyway, let's hope that Mexico gets a chance to breathe and nothing further develops. Let's hope, too, that Louisiana gets through the weekend without biblical damage. It's not even a hurricane, it's just another one of those every 500-year rains. Earlier this year, Texas and West Virginia, and last year, South Carolina. All right, and what about the passengers who were scheduled to fly Delta at the beginning of the week? You know, my empathy for the employees of Delta Airlines. There had to be thousands of passengers just screaming at them. There was nothing they could do. Actually, most of the passengers were well behaved. It's a very trying situation. Computer glitch in Atlanta, and the whole system worldwide had to shut down. Obviously, the plane still in the air kept flying, but there were no takeoffs for hours. And then only by canceling flights, through sometime Wednesday morning, a lot of flights, allowed them to get the planes back to where they were and resume normal operations. I have empathy, too, for the passengers. You know, if you had an important business meeting, well, okay, I suppose you could phone or Skype or FaceTime. If you lost vacation times, you're never going to get those back. But Delta might be able to make it up for you. Maybe you get some free future tickets or something. But the worst scenario of all, what if you were flying to visit a critically ill loved one who wasn't expected to last for more than a few hours and you're stuck in some damn airport? All right, so the Rio Olympics are in full swing. Have you been watching? I admit I have not watched a lot, but, you know, there is still a week going on. Oh, and then the Brazilian Senate chooses this week to vote 59-21 to move ahead with the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff. The whole world is there. At least they had the good sense to hold the trial after the Olympics. Anyway, I told a friend, I was talking to a friend, and I said, you know, it would be really cool to march in the Olympic parade into the stadium on the opening night. I was never an Olympic athlete. I'm never going to be an Olympic athlete. Never going to happen for me. Even were I younger, I mean, this is the United States. Whatever sport you pick, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands competing to make the team. But what if I were younger and I was Puerto Rican? Now, Puerto Rico has its own teams, you know. But see, I watched them play volleyball, and they have, I don't think baseball's in the Olympics, but they have a lot of baseball players, and golf is in the Olympics this time. And were I younger and Puerto Rican, what I might do instead is go online, GoFundMe, get the seed money, fly to the mainland, get a teacher, take lessons. For the Winter Olympics, I'd become the best skier that Puerto Rico ever had. Maybe the only one. Also in sports, yes, the Olympics are in full swing, but the NFL preseason just began this past week. It's now less than 2 weeks until college football resumes. All right, if you can, pick up a copy of the July 25th issue of Time magazine. There's an article by David Von Driel, and I read it. Of course I did. It was an interview with three people. Today's two best golfers, number one, Jason Day, and number two, Jordan Spieth, and the greatest golfer ever, Jack Nicklaus. And this is more philosophy than a recitation of golf statistics. Let me read you just a wee little bit here. Nicklaus said, even when I was in my 40s, I won the Masters at 46. I just kept trying to work myself to get better. And all of a sudden, 25 years or so have passed. On this warm spring morning, Spieth was looking ahead to his 23rd birthday, which falls on July 27th. No one so young could possibly understand how 25 years can pass by all of a sudden. It is a thing that older people say, first with astonishment and later with resignation. That's true. One of the greatest lines I ever heard was, and I don't know where I originally heard it. I wish I remembered who originally made it up. But inside every old person is a young person asking, what the hell just happened? It's true. A bit later in the article, it notes that all three are ambassadors for Rolex watches. So when they compare the watches, they discover that Nicklaus's watch is twice as old. Not twice as old as Spieth's watch. Twice as old as Spieth. All right, so near the end of the article is this wonderful metaphor. Life begins so slowly, like a thrill ride climbing to the release point, and then passes in a whoosh. Yep. Hey, let me tell you about my book, Shrink. Or wait, I can let others do it. Welcome back. A reminder, you can write us at the Bruce channel at yahoo.com. You can watch all of our previous episodes at either our Facebook page or at tinyurl.com/Bruce channel. So, 2 weeks ago, I said I was going to see, at the behest of a friend, the then just released documentary, Hillary's America, The Secret History of the Democratic Party. I watched, I listened, I tried to take notes in the dark. It's a little bit frustrating because, as I mentioned last week, I am spoiled by technology. I like that I can pause and if needed go back, and if the sound is obscured, I can turn on captions. But even if I had this movie on disc, there are way too many points to discuss all of them. And then, as I thought about what I was going to tell you, I realized that even if I only touched on some of them, it would still take way too much time. So instead, what I decided to do is talk about it twice. And today, the film is essentially in two parts. The second part of the title is the first part of the film. So today, we will talk about the secret history of the Democratic Party. But I think we should talk a little bit first about the filmmaker. His name is Dinesh D'Souza, and he's a smart guy. He's a very smart guy. He was born in Mumbai. He attended high school in Arizona as an exchange student. Did well enough on his SATs to get admitted to Dartmouth. And while there, he wrote conservative articles. He later worked in the Reagan administration. He wrote for the Heritage Foundation. He wrote some very strong conservative books and some other books advocating strong Christianity. He's a critic of atheism. All of those points are fine. He has his point of view. Now, his latest movie is, I think, the third of three, is specifically made with a point of view. And that's fine. Lots of documentaries push a point of view. I am not saying the movie is all crap. I am not. But any filmmaker can, if he or she wishes to, make a takedown piece about almost anyone, certainly most politicians. St. Francis isn't running, is he? All right, so before seeing the movie, I found a July interview in which Mr. D'Souza, speaking about the movie, said, "I think there's a good number of people who, while they may believe Hillary herself might be a little shady, that she is the head of a party which has been doing good things for a lot of people. That the Democratic Party has a noble history of fighting for the underdog, the ordinary man, the little guy, immigrants, blacks, and women." So he spends the first part of the movie showing us that it was the Democrats who held slaves. It was the Republicans, led by Abraham Lincoln, who prosecuted the war to free the slaves. He does not point out that the Republicans, without the compassion and restraint of Lincoln, he spoke of with malice toward none, without Lincoln around, the Republicans decided to punish the South. The Southerners resisted by voting for Democrats. And they did that for 100 years. The Southern states always voted Democratic. They were known as the Solid South. And yes, their motives were not merely protecting themselves from the carpetbagging Republicans. They wished to regain their superiority, or at least hold on to what was left. They didn't want blacks to vote. So once the Yankee troops left, they put in poll taxes, literacy tests. You had to show your grandfather had voted. All of that was done by Democrats. Yes, bad stuff. Mr. D'Souza also correctly asserts that the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, was started by, and he says it was the terrorist wing of the Democratic Party, and that is true. He correctly points out that in the 60s, more Republicans than Democrats voted for the Civil Rights Act. Also true. But it's not secret, the secret history of the Democratic Party. This is not history. And then he goes on to denounce pretty much every Democratic president, beginning with the first one, Andrew Jackson. And I agree, Andrew Jackson was a war criminal. He was a genocidal maniac. Had there been such a term, war criminal, he might very well have been tried and convicted. So I agree with him about Mr. D'Souza's assessment of Andrew Jackson. But Mr. D'Souza is a conservative. He has a conservative agenda. And early on, he established that a Democratic president had an affair. It may have been Bill Clinton. But later in the movie, speaking of a different Democrat with an affair, he asks, "Hey, what is it with the Democrats and their women anyway?" Even if you are a staunch Republican, if you hate the Democrats, if you are objective, you must acknowledge that is unfair. It is patently unfair. And that unfairness is where he reveals the agenda. He brings up Democratic presidential affairs with a voice of irony. Doesn't mention that Republicans have had affairs. Republican Warren G. Harding had many affairs in the White House. Now, I don't care that they did. But if we are to characterize philandering as a character flaw, we ought to point out it is a bipartisan character flaw. All right. Again, before I attended the movie, in a different interview, I saw that Mr. D'Souza, speaking of what was in the movie, said, "But now people can hear what they said in private." He does have some actors say and do some pretty awful things. Some of those are just made-up dialogue. There is no record. Lyndon Johnson's dialogue often includes the N-word. As it happens, I just, a couple of months ago, finished Robert Caro's Lyndon Johnson, The Passage of Power. That book is the fourth in a series of books by Caro about Lyndon Johnson. There is still one more to come. The series is a real tour de force. There's probably no one on earth who knows more about Lyndon Johnson. And yes, that is how Lyndon Johnson spoke. He was a crude man. He talked to reporters while on the toilet, not only through the door. The door was open. I'm not going to excuse his language. It was the language he grew up with. It was a different time and place. But there is no doubt in my mind that he, Lyndon Johnson, genuinely wanted to help the disadvantaged. See, he grew up poor. Really, really, really poor. Humiliatingly poor. And that was probably worse because they had been affluent. And he was smart, but he went to a third-rate school, West Texas State Teachers College. Some of the professors didn't have a four-year degree, never mind a master's or PhD. So when he got into office, when he was the president, from everything I have read and heard and seen, Lyndon Johnson wanted to help the people who were poorest. And we know that because he taped many of his conversations. There's over 800 hours. You can listen. His conversations are online. And his language, his thoughts about civil rights clearly agree with what we were taught. Easy to find. Google Johnson's conversations, or they're at the millercenter.org. But, I digress. Mr. D'Souza's point that the Democrats were bad is not in dispute. Nor, as I said, is it secret. But here's the thing. Things change. They do. The Cleveland Browns were once a powerhouse in the NFL. The Pittsburgh Steelers were hapless. That's no longer the case. So, following the civil rights bills of the 60s, which Lyndon Johnson pushed through, and he did know he was risking his party's future in the South, the solid South. He famously said, "I fear we may have turned the South Republican for a long time." Richard Nixon's 1968 campaign famously employed its Southern strategy, playing to the fear of change. Nixon won the South. The old Democratic solid South turned solidly Republican, and it pretty much remains so today. I live here. I talk to people. Many of the whites still resent those changes. So, the first half of the movie posits the thought that the Republicans are the party for civil rights and equality. But consider some of the good old boys of the South might like to, and some maybe do, belong to the KKK. And they're Republicans. Former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke is running for the Senate in Louisiana as a Republican. So I repeat, things change. The parties of today are not what they were 60 or 100 years ago. Things change. All right, we'll get more to that next week on the second half of the movie. Meanwhile, some quickies. We were speaking of the party of Lincoln. Here's a long-lost photo of our 16th president as he delivered the Gettysburg Address. Gotta love it. Also, mindful. The Republicans, remember Ted Cruz being booed out of the convention a month ago. Why was he booed? 2 reasons. He did not endorse Donald Trump. And 2, he said, vote your conscience, which was the motto of the Stop Trump or the Anybody But Trump forces. Like Senator Cruz or not, like his policies or not, you have to credit him with being true to his beliefs. Unlike, say, Marco Rubio, who called Trump every name in the book, including dangerous con man. But Rubio's backing Trump now. So Ted Cruz seems to have proven true the words of former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Do what you feel in your heart to be right. You'll be criticized for it anyway. And speaking of Donald Trump, no, actually not speaking, well, sort of. I saw a sign. It proposed that we ban pre-shredded cheese. Why? Well, to make America great again, of course. And finally, this. All right, chill out, smile. I know the internet was invented so that we could all share cat videos. I submit this as a candidate for one of the best ever. Isn't that absolutely sublime? All right. That was from the YouTube channel of Gerardo Chia. It's on the screen. Google that. I recommend you visit his page. The kittens were cute, but most of his vids are incredible 3D painting, like this. And there's lots of others. Try it again. Gerardo Chia. Just Google it. You'll enjoy. All right, so go scratch somebody's back or get your back scratched. Which sounds like a truly wonderful way to begin your week, the one that I hope is the best you've ever had.